we're all guilty of unconscious bias regardless. So I actually wanted to physically be able to do something to change that. So the way we work now is we take on a lot of young talent and help develop and nurture young talent.
Let's start at the beginning of pre-studio, but could you sort of tell us how it was that you got into production and how you found yourself working in this field in the beginning?
Well, it's a funny story. I've always obsessed with animation since I was a kid, and I always thought that one day it'd be really nice to have a job that entails something to do with animation. But I think growing up in our time, we didn't really have specific education facilities, and animation is not something that's ever mentioned at school or when you go to college, or from early education. It's never a career option. So it was particularly challenging to be totally frank, and I think I found that persistence was the key. And I was fortunate enough to be able to join one of the country's very first animation courses and experimental media. And that was just at college. And after that, I was like, yes, this is definitely what I want to do. It's very creative. And just found myself endlessly applying for runner jobs in every single production company, post facility, literally, physically having to walk around Soho and hand out a CV. And luckily enough, I was able to land a runner role at the time and just really work my way up from there.
And so how many years have you been working in the industry, roughly? To get people an idea how long
too
since
many than I like to publicly admit. But I think I left college when I was 18 and I went straight into work. So my parents are first generation immigrants. So actually I had no ambition to go to university because I thought, well, actually, I can't afford it. I don't want to get into a huge debt. And I thought, well, weighing the pros and cons out, it was like, I don't really know exactly what I want to do in animation. So I'm going to go and get a job and just see what happens. So from 18 till now, and I'm 33, so a very long time. Most of my adult life.
That's brilliant. And so what kind of productions have you worked on then over your career? Have you always sort of worked in commercial, or have you worked in series, or what kind of things have you worked on?
I've done a range of things. I think what I found appealing with commercials and shorter form content like short films or title sequences for feature films is that they're the projects that don't require necessarily very long-term commitment. So for example, with a 30-second TVC, even though you can spend endless resource and time finessing things and developing the story, but just the challenge of squeezing it all into that 30 seconds physically and having to do it quite quickly time-wise, it's always been very exciting. So I think for me, commercials has always been my passion, and that's kind of what I've stuck to, but also exploring, as I said, feature film title sequences, because you already kind of have a film that's in development or in post, and you're not starting at the very beginning and then having to commit for 5 years or 3 years, this is what I'm going to be doing. So those are the things that I like toying with. I think longer term projects require a little bit too much time, and I think for me it's always exciting to be able to hop from one thing to another and try and explore as many different things as possible, because I think animation's so endless in terms of styles and approaches that it would be a shame to waste, like 3 years just doing one style and one thing.
Oh, I mean, I think that's brilliant. I mean, that must be pretty exhausting as well at the same time, having to, turn around television commercials in pretty fast, you have pretty fast turnarounds, don't you, from brief to delivery?
It absolutely is. And it's always the same story, things are always needed for yesterday, so you always feel like you're behind schedule. So when we are fortunate enough to do projects for example, museum exhibitions or theatre, and suddenly we have what we feel is this luxury of time, and the clients or your collaboration partner tells you, oh, actually, this is really quick turnaround for us, you feel like, oh God, I'm in the wrong bit of animation. I might abandon the commercial side. But actually, in a way, I think if you really like your job, the stress of it and just the continuous momentum is actually quite a nice driver.
And what would you say then is one of the proudest moments you've had in your career as a producer? What kind of project stands out for you? Can you pick one?
I don't really think it's a project per se. And I think a lot of, animation directors and animators probably feel the same. It's not so much a project. I think it's always when you feel that you've achieved something and seen a finished product or a finished film. So for me, projects where, for example, we did a project at the beginning of the year with a really talented young up-and-coming animation director, and it was for her first bit of commissioned content by an actual client. And I think for myself and another more seasoned director who was coaching her through the process, I think that was a really proud moment in my career where I'm able to actually sit and reflect and be like, well, hopefully, we've started something here, we've triggered hopefully a very long lasting career for a person that normally wouldn't get that opportunity. So I think those ones are the ones that make me smile and make it all worth it in the end.
Yeah, and with that ethos, you can see why you would then set up a studio which has a supportive and nurturing mission behind it. So I think that's really brilliant that your focus is on the talent and that kind of talent development as part of what you do.
I think it's really, really challenging for them because in a way, obviously I'm a producer, so, practically I'm able to help people realize their ideas and help them manage timings and get the right crew on board. But just seeing what some of these guys and girls can do is absolutely incredible. And, it's just like talent that I have zero of. So, just being grateful to be in the same room and in their presence when they're thinking of ideas and working through their process is incredible. But that is not to say that just because somebody's talented, they will get the same opportunities or get their films funded or get considered even for a TV commercial. Because that's just not how it works, especially if they don't already have a very built folio. But how do you get to that point where you're established and you have a folio to present when actually nobody would even consider you until, you can show a million examples that you've done it before. So I think there's a balance there.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we can talk about that moment where, now I know we've talked about this, that you ended up setting up a studio, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you ended up setting up a studio because of circumstance. You found yourself in a position where you were delivering productions when another company was no longer operating, and you sort of ended up setting up Nerve Productions and carrying on working with that talent. Could you just talk a little bit about, that experience and going from being a producer to now being a business owner? Could you give us your experience, what you learnt from that?
At the time, I think I didn't have a moment to catch my breath and think about how scary that leap actually is. As a producer, you always feel like you are responsible for your director, you're responsible for making sure that they're happy and able to be creative and do their part of the production, and that the team is looked after. But then also you have the client side where you need to ensure that actually we are delivering what we agreed and that we're all happy with it and getting them on board to be in sync with your director. But then to actually suddenly have to take ownership of absolutely everything, and it's not just that one project, it is quite a scary thing. And I think at the time you don't really think about it as a producer. You just think, well, this is the problem right now, we have all these things to deliver to our agency friends and colleagues, and it's like, well, we need to just get on with it and do it. And that was the solution. But I think what massively helps, and in any situation in life, is really just having a little bit of a support network around you. So my partner and a couple of directors actually from the previous company were instrumental in just being like, what are you doing? Like, you can so set up on your own, you should have done it years ago, and go for it. And I think that's always nice to hear, because you think, well, actually you're right, I probably can do this, you know, like what's the worst that can happen? Actually, you can fail, but if you don't try, then you'll never know. So yeah, kind of went for it.
And so in terms of, I mean, because it's 4 years ago now, isn't it, that you set it up?
Yeah.
Casting your mind back, what sort of things do you wish someone had told you about setting up a business? What did you learn the hard way that you can make a bit easier for other people listening now?
I think sometimes it really depends on your personality. So I'm very organized and very structured. But I think, you know, it's a tricky one because everybody takes away different things from running their own business. And I think it is very, very difficult when you take on that leap and be like, right, I'm going to do this for myself. But suddenly you become responsible on a different level for so many people and so many different things that actually, you know, I don't necessarily want to worry about paying the rent. I want to worry about this job looking really lovely and creating this amazing animation. So I think in a way, on my part, it's always been too trusting, I think. And that's why, you know, you kind of have to draw the line and draw some boundaries and understand that actually not everything is as it appears and not as clear cut. So going into business and being too trusting is probably one thing that you kind of have to tap yourself every now and then on the shoulder and be like, actually, do not assume anything and just looking after yourself. Actually, that's the main thing.
And do you have other people in the company? Do you have other business support, accounting support? What kind of things did you need to put in place when you became a company?
I think having a great accountant is really important, and that is the one investment that I would advise anybody to it's an absolute must. Just having somebody that understands do's and don'ts and is able to guide you through that process, because ultimately your business and what you're doing becomes your core focus. So if you're having to do accountancy and all of those things on your own as well, it takes a lot of time, and when you look at it, it's actually not worth it in the long run, because you really are kind of muddling through it and you're having to learn. And that is not where your focus should be. It's kind of like all the way over here, looking after the business, making sure you're getting new business and figuring out, well, what do I want this company to be, and going with that. And I think the accountant is somebody that will give you so much advice and guide you in the right direction. So that's the one investment I'd say, just go for it. So worth it. They take away the headache.
Yeah. And then, yeah, so in terms of the basics that you need, what kind of things would you recommend people bear in mind, other than accountancy, which is obviously a really important one, because if you don't pay the HMRC, obviously that's the best way of getting yourself into trouble. Make sure you always pay the taxman first.
Yep.
But what other sort of advice would you have for people who are interested in studio ownership?
I'd say, obviously, you know, at the moment, everybody always thinks like you need a huge office and you need to think about who to employ immediately. I think it's a gradual process, and just, you know, going with what you can in terms of your means and doing bits that you can yourself initially, and then growing from there. So, you know, just having a growth plan and slowly moving forward. And, you know, of course, you take calculated risks all the time, even when you're freelance, for example. If you go and work for a company, you're doing it in good faith that actually at the end of the project, they will pay that invoice, and you know you've done your best job. And it's exactly the same with running your own studio. You've kind of got to always outweigh the risks and be like, is this an adventure that we want to embark on? And I think it's always really nice to have somebody to bounce ideas off of. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a co-owner or a partner, but just somebody that will be a person that will ground you slightly. And if you're having concerns or insecurities, someone that is able to be objective and, you know, pull your sleeve and tell you, well, actually, have you considered this? And it doesn't necessarily need to be somebody who's super hands-on in your business. It can even be a partner or a friend that you trust.
And do you have any sort of mentoring, or did you do any business training in the beginning of this process of setting up your company?
Not when I started up Nerd. So at the company where I was before, I was there for 12 and a half years, so a very long time. And I had worked my way up from runner to eventually EP and overseeing productions and setting up production departments in the US, and specifically doing new business. So over those years, I was very fortunate to be able to physically hands-on, try many things, which later on I was able to apply in my own studio, really. And I think that's always the best way to do it, is actually do things physically yourself, hands-on, and then you can apply that experience in your own predicament for yourself. I think that was a massive help. You kind of learn along the way other people manage companies successfully, things that they do that you're like, well, actually, that's not how I would do it. I don't morally agree with this. But it's good to learn the good things and the bad things and figure out your own way.
Absolutely. And in terms of inclusivity in your studio, I know you talk about in your life and your ethics, you're very much an advocate for diversity and equality. Could you talk about how that translates into the way you run your studio?
Yeah, I mean, our approach is very untraditional and unconventional, I have to say, and not many production companies work like this. But I think it's really important that, one day when we do stop working in the industry, that we do leave some kind of a legacy and some kind of a mark. And I'd hate to be a person that just retires and then 3 years later, nobody really knows what you did, or, what have you achieved really as a person. So I think there was a few of us at Nerd that felt that, actually, we've been in an industry for a long time, and equality is something that has always been a challenge, and equal opportunities. And, we're all guilty of unconscious bias regardless. So I actually wanted to physically be able to do something to change that. So the way we work now is we take on a lot of young talent and help develop and nurture young talent. And the way we do that, we know it's challenging for clients signing off budgets to just put their, whole trust and be like, okay, here's a pile of money, make this thing. I know you haven't done it, but we really want to support young talent. In reality, that is really going to limit their chances, and it's not going to happen. So the way we work is we pair them up with a more seasoned director, and they kind of are the safety net, basically. So they just offer the support and help them through the process in communicating with clients, whether they're a bit low on confidence or whatever that might be. And then I tend to get involved in the production side and just make sure that actually everything that we are doing is within the scope that we've got. And, the same thing with talent that is underrepresented. I think it's really important to say, well, if we're trying to champion diversity, that we support everybody and not isolate other groups of people by just drumming one cause and drumming the same drum. I think diversity can only be achieved if you invite everybody to the table and respect each other's opinions and beliefs. They might be totally the opposite and very conflicting. And it definitely sparks some very heated conversations, but that's actually what's really nice, that everybody is passionate about what they bring to the table. And it's always nice when you find the middle ground.
So how many directors do you have how many people do you represent at the moment?
So we have a mix. We work with a lot of illustrators and directors. So altogether, I think we're 34, 35.
Wow.
But everybody has their specialized style. And I'm a massive fan of collaboration, not just with our clients. I think, a lot of companies say, oh, we love to collaborate with our clients, but actually I think collaborating internally is, where it all starts, and pairing up illustrators and directors to bring things to life is amazing. And same with our live action talent and animation talent. It's always nice to pull people together.
And how are you finding that in this working remotely? How's that challenge working in keeping such a collaborative approach?
Well, that's the beauty of it. We always kind of work like this from the very beginning, because as you're trying to find diverse talent, you find that they're not all sat, in the same studio and able to be in the same space. So we have a very international pool of talent, and same with our clients, they're all very international. And what you find is that, actually it really makes no difference, because you're able to catch up with each other. And, we're constantly on WhatsApp, on Zoom now. And so we've always worked like this. So when clients now ask, oh, how are you coping and how are we going to do this production? Like, well, actually, we're more about finding the right person to do the job rather than, you know, us being physically in the same space and just using the talent that we've got for something that they might not be right for. So I think for us, it's always been a way.
And in terms of how that, so I think what you're saying, that model, I've not heard that before of mentoring, that kind of mentoring approach of having someone more experienced working with new talent. I think that's really impressive. I mean, how would you suggest anyone else brings that into their studio?
Well, you've got to have directors that have the same ethos and believe in giving a little piece of themselves, because I have tried to push this before in other places, and it's simply, you know, it's been just like a straight no, because people get very protective of their craft and their knowledge, which I totally understand. If you feel threatened that, you know, if I'm passing this on and this younger person is coming in, they might in 2 years take all my work, which simply isn't the case, because we found that actually over the 4 years that we've worked together, quite often you will have clients coming back and saying, oh, we really loved what you guys did, and what do you think? It's not a case of, you know, suddenly people are sidelined. And I think actually there's a bit of learning both ways, because some of our younger talent are able to demonstrate techniques or softwares and, you know, teach our more seasoned talents new ways of looking at things and doing things that they might not have explored because they've done something a certain way for a long time and it's worked. So, you know, people do have that it's not broken, why fix it logic as well. But I think it's finding that balance where people are not selfish with their craft and they're not threatened. I think that's what works really well, and seeing it as an opportunity to collaborate and create something with someone and potentially change their career course, which is an incredible thing to be able to contribute towards. But there are directors out there that are willing to do that and see the benefits and really enjoy it, because it's an exploration. And I think bringing film to life, being able to discuss your ideas and, you know, finesse them and further embellish them, it's always a positive thing. It can never be bad.
And then just in terms of then the clients you work with, how are you, I mean, do you sort of approach clients or select clients, or are you very kind of concerned about what their ethics are like and how inclusive their practices are? You know, how does that kind of work when you go out into the broader world, which is not necessarily as inclusive as your studio?
I mean, we're always quite vocal about what our ethos is and how we operate and why, which I think is important. And no doubt, I'm sure that has lost us jobs in the past. But I'm like, you know what, if people don't feel the same and we don't have the same cause, sometimes maybe that collaboration wasn't for us and it's not meant to happen. So, you know, fair enough. But I think it has brought us closer to brands that we do like working with, and same with agencies. So I think there are always pros and cons to having an opinion. This is the thing. Not everybody's prepared to hear it, not happy to hear it. But I think, you know, in this day and age, we're all quite quick to get offended by somebody's expression, or we read something online and we're like, well, actually, I really disagree with that. And I think that's the beauty of being able to actually fight for your cause so openly in the modern world, that it's okay if people see you as slightly controversial or disagree with what you're doing. You might not align, and that's okay. So I think in terms of brands, I mean, it's always nice to collaborate with brands that have a good ethos. And, you know, sadly, I feel like there's enough of them. But I think our clients are generally really delighted that actually we're able to push young talent and we're able to push talent from underrepresented backgrounds. So in a way, I think it is a way forward. If we are making content that is now, you know, viewed globally so quickly on any device, we do need to be able to actually be that community and that voice and be authentic about it, rather than say, we try and practice this, but, you know, it's a box ticking exercise. It doesn't work. People see through it.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. So could you talk a bit about how you find talent? You've got this brilliant pool of diverse artists that you represent. do you work with agents to find them, or are you reviewing portfolios constantly? What do you look
Always
for, and where
looking
do you
at
find
portfolios.
them?
That is the one thing that, there's quite a few of us, including some of the senior directors, that absolutely love reviewing folios and talking to talent and seeing if they're the right fit for us and if we're actually the right fit for them too. So it takes a special kind of person to be a nerd, I think, and there has to be a fire in your belly for what you do. But it is, we handpick all our talent, and I think that's really important. I know that obviously, once you grow to a certain size as a studio, it becomes more and more challenging, but I think that is the one thing you can't afford to take your eyes off, is actually ensuring that, the talent is essentially who you want to be. And, we all affect each other so much. So, one project or one artist can make an impact on others in the nerd family. So I always like to make sure that everybody's skill sets complement each other and there's potential for collaboration, and just thinking how we can help each other rise, basically, rather than like, oh, actually these guys might be a competition so we can offer an alternative to the client. It's a false economy. It doesn't work long term, because people are unhappy and eventually they leave, and without them there is no nerd in my eyes.
And do you accept people to send in links to you? I'm sure there are people on this in this audience who are very interested in being represented by someone like yourself. So would you expect people to email you and send you links to their show reels? How's your preferred method of kind of scouting for talent?
I think email is always really nice, because it's actually you kind of get to watch things when you need a moment to, tear yourself away from a daunting budget or a schedule, and you can just watch some inspiring work and read about someone or look somebody up. That's always a nice refresher to my day. So yeah, that's definitely the best way.
Do you think it would be harder to start a studio now than it would have been sort of 5 years ago? And do you think there will always be work to go around? That's an interesting question.
Oh, I like that question. Controversial. I think now it's a particularly challenging time, because even the, huge studios that before wouldn't consider certain type of projects, I think we're at a time where everybody's so fearful about the future that everybody's fighting for the same work. And a lot of brands are pulling funding because they're like, we don't know how the year's going to pan out. How are things going to work? Let's think about it. Let's hold fire. So I think as brands have become more cautious and lots of funding across the board has stopped, everybody's kind of sitting there thinking, okay, what next? What happens? So I think right now, yes, it's a challenging time. 5 years ago, I think it was probably differently challenging again, because I found that actually at the time when we were starting, there was a rise in people just saying, you know what, actually, I can do this on my own, and why am I working for someone else? Whereas, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, you really just had a handful of production companies and production studios. So when I started, it really wasn't that difficult to go and hand out a CV to every studio in London, because there wasn't that many of them. And I think as technology has evolved and aided us to, utilize technology for craft, I think it's created a much wider pool of talent and a lot more choice, which is great for funding organizations and brands. But naturally, there's a lot more competition and a lot more out there. So I think it's pros and cons, really, because competition is always healthy. It means you don't get lazy and you force yourself to learn. So that's great. But at the same time, having the wins becomes more challenging. So it's a bit of both.
Okay, someone says, I've got a rather boring admin question for you, but I think this is quite an interesting one from a production perspective. How do you capture and keep the detail of the talent that approach your studio? Do you have a database, or what's the best way?
We have a database. Yeah. That's the best way to always do it, because then in your head you've got quick notes and things that you can glance at and share around as a team, because ultimately it's not just me that makes the decisions. I like to speak to our marketing team, because they're the ones that are responsible for reaching out to clients, not just myself, and seeing how we connect you with people that you want to work with. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and same with our sales reps. they need to be able to confidently go out and talk about you and your work, and not just the folio, but it's also more about the people behind the work. Because I think that's something that's really important. Everybody wants to know who they're working with and, you know, why they're doing what they're doing. So yeah, we have quite an extensive detailed database that we keep.
And can I ask you, is that an Excel spreadsheet or anything more fancy?
I'm ashamed to say that it is. Some habits just don't die. Give me a new Zazzy platform, but I'm like, good old Excel. It's like, I can see that in my sleep. It's easy.
And then someone's asked an interesting question about starting up. Did you apply for any funding, or did you have to kind of, you know, sink your own money in to get your business up and going? How did that kind of work? And please feel free to say, I don't want to answer that question.
No, it's absolutely fine. I always say I will answer all questions. Well, to be fair, I have this fear of debt generally. So even though I was advised to take a loan and do it that way, I just thought actually that is the kind of risk that I can't afford to take, especially, you know, having just come from a company that had gone into liquidation and nobody had been paid for a while. You just suddenly feel the dread of like, actually, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the next person that potentially puts someone else at risk. So with the money that I had, I was like, this is what I'm putting towards the company. And, you know, we didn't start with a massive office. We literally had 2 desks in a share space, and it was very bland and very depressing. But I thought, what is the priority here? You know, getting the right website and making sure that we do have that initial startup money to turn over the first few jobs, and then you go from there. I think it's just about working out priorities and saying, well, actually, this is how much I'm willing to risk and for this long, and go from there.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that sounds about right, doesn't it? You've got to manage the risk. It's really important not to go flashy office straight away.
Yeah, well, exactly. And don't get me wrong, I really, you know, it's not like I'm talking like, oh, you know, I had hundreds of thousands of pounds and I thought I'd go into this business. It really was no fun. It was out of a very specific need to be able to complete things that we promised to clients. And I was super broke because I hadn't been paid for a while. So actually it was just kind of like, okay, we're going to be paid some money by an agency that we're delivering the work to, and I could take it and go and sulk for 6 months and be like, actually things hadn't worked out. I've given my whole adult career to this other company, but I was like, no, actually need to do something with it.
Okay, another question here. It's the same person, I think. How do you find a legal service that is not ruinously expensive for a studio in its early days? What legal advice? Where did you get your legal advice from when you started out?
It really varies. So for different bits, you go to different people. So the APA was an enormous source of just knowledge and legal support when it comes to
Could you just say what the APA is?
Oh, it's an Advertising Producers Association. So you can just sign up for a membership, and they're amazing. They're really helpful. And Steve, who runs it, is really brilliant at knowing all the ins and outs and the legal side of production and what to do and what not to do. And then, of course, you know, there's things insurance-wise that you really need to know, and you need to get somebody on board who actually understands production. So just not just any insurance company, that's just not adequate. And same for your finance. So you kind of want to have organizations or people that you trust that you can dip into for their knowledge. And in the beginning, you do ask for endless favors. That is just how it is.
Absolutely. Let's see, we've got lots of questions here. So another one about portfolios. So a young director fresh out of university who has a generalist portfolio, any specific advice you'd give from your perspective of looking at portfolios? What are you looking for from someone who's just graduated?
I think usually, I mean, it really depends. Graduation folios that we get through can be such wide range of things, and sometimes you see things and you're like, oh wow, I never would have thought that's a graduate. And sometimes you see things that you're like, actually this is not the standard that I'm used to seeing at graduate level. But you can see that they have a really good idea, or, you know, there is something in there. So it is about being objective and just looking at the folios and seeing what, you know, what potential you can see, because sometimes people have a talent for something that they're not actually even aware of themselves. So it's really important that you do share your folios with other, you know, not just friends, basically. Share it with other professionals, send it round and ask for genuine feedback, and then be prepared to actually take it on board, because sometimes your feelings might get hurt. Because if you're looking for genuine feedback, you might actually hear, oh, you know, this isn't your thing, but this other thing you're really, really good at. And I think it's really important to be able to hear the compliments as well as the constructive criticism to your work. So, and there's always potential. I think by the time that, you know, people graduate, they usually have spent a good few years developing and learning and exploring. It's just about finding, well, do I want to try and do many things later, or do I want to specialize in one style or one approach?
And then the question here from someone who is currently working in education and branding and is interested in working in animation production. Would you have any advice on how you get into animation production from your perspective?
It depends on the route that you want to take, and specifically the job that you're after. What is the end game? Where do you want to be? But actually, in a way, that's probably an easier transition than if you're kind of going into animation with absolutely no experience. Because I think in a way, you know, just speaking to animation studios and seeing what skills you can offer and, you know, what you're hoping to gain in return, that's a good start. And just, you know, having a casual, if you can, reach out to people and just have a casual coffee and a casual chat rather than something formal, because every studio has a different way of operating, and, you know, every company has a different way that they seek out talent, and it's about finding how you can fit into that team. And sadly, there's no formula. Everybody does it differently. It really just depends on the separate entities.
So what are your plans for Nerd going forward now then? You've got your 4 years in. Well, it sounds like it, global domination.
Literally. So, well, it's tricky. We've reached a point now where we're just kind of like, everybody really loves what we're doing and the, you know, the path that we've set for ourselves. But I think at 4 years, we're still a very young company and there's so much left to do and to try. And I think if slowly we can take talent on board and make them, you know, into successful directors that have got very established folios, then, you know, that is kind of the ultimate goal. Actually nurturing people and supporting each other and getting to work together, that's always really nice.
And because you work across animation technique, is that right as well? I know you mentioned Illustrator, so you've got the 2D, but you work in 3D. Do you work in stop motion as well?
We do lots of stop motion, lots of 2D, from, you know, traditional to more like vector art and stylized, lots of CGI and visual effects, and then we tend to mix it up quite a bit with live action and stuff like that. So we do have lots of talent across the board that all experiment with different techniques, and we do like having the opportunity to actually bring it together when we can. So we cross-pollinate as well, which is always fun.
Question here, apart from the APA, are there other good resources out there people should check out? What would you suggest as a business owner? What do people need to look at?
Are we talking about legal and business side of things, or sounds like it?
Yeah, go legal.
I think the APA are everybody's Bible in production, but there's lots of groups that you can join and ask for advice as well, like, you know, women in advertising, and there, you know, there are little communities depending on what you're looking for, really, and what kind of guidance. Sadly, there isn't that much business sort of support, actually, in a way, because it's not an industry that is, for some reason, we're always a little bit sidelined and a little bit quirky. People don't think about setting up mentoring, and you know, it's something that you seek individually from another person, but it's not as evolved as some other industries where you've got endless resources that you can tap into. So I think there's literally a few gems that we all default to. We're like, right, we know that, you know, APA is great for any challenges really, personally, because they do the legal side and they do lots of negotiation. So anything from contracts to sort of more complex issues.
And just in terms, I should flag up for anyone who doesn't know, ScreenSkills does actually have a mentoring program. So if you're interested in being mentored, or in fact being a mentor yourself, check it out in the opportunities section. You can apply. Small plug for ScreenSkills there.
No, but that's amazing. That's a game changer for sure, because people are always desperately looking, and you know, it's very difficult, for example, for myself to point them in the right direction sometimes, because there just aren't that many resources. And I think mentorship is really important, because you know, you learn so many amazing things about yourself, about what to do, what not to do, and how to do it, and just having that support is incredible. So you can find your own way. But sadly, you know, things are a little bit frantic always in production, so it's not necessarily lack of people that want to mentor and platforms. It's just a case of physically there's not enough time. So I think it's amazing that you guys are doing that.
And there's also Access VFX are really good. I think they also have a mentoring program, but they're very good about diversity in the industry. And in terms of inclusion, do you have any resources, or are you part of any groups that people should look out for?
I think what is a really good platform to be associated with for female talent is Free to Work or Free to Bid, because a lot of advertising agencies and brands are actually, you know, trying to actively be more inclusive and empower women. That's quite a good one for female talent and young talent. And then I think now they're starting to think about inclusivity a little bit more as a broader spectrum, so not just make it a female specific thing, because time and time again we always raise this issue. It's like, you know, it's great to empower women, but you are actually discriminating against our male counterparts. It's more about equality. So I think they're considering how to correctly represent other groups too. But I think they're quite a good one. Just trying to think it top of my head now. If it comes to me, I will bring it up. But I think that they're a fantastic one. Yeah.
Yeah, and because I mean, you're a passionate advocate for diversity and equality, and I know you speak a lot, don't you? A lot of different conferences and opportunities to kind of get your message out and to encourage others to do similar work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky road, because there are very, you know, influential diversity advocates out there too who also do the same thing. So we kind of all tend to be like, right, where are you speaking? What's next? What's a good event? But there is also another platform that is called The Other Box, which is incredible for diversity, and they organize lots of events, and they're in touch with lots of different organizations. So they're a really good resource for getting information, for having access to brands. So yeah, definitely you guys look them up too, because they're fantastic as well. And I've spoken at their events before and gone to their events independently, and they really do practice what they preach, and they're trying to change the ways the industry works. So they're a good one too.
What was that name again?
The Other Box.
The Other Box.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. A question again about if you had to start your company again today, what would you do differently? Anything from the learning?
What would I do differently? Oh, I haven't really thought about that. I try not to dwell on things too much, because actually at the time every decision you make feels like the right decision, and you can only change things that you can change moving forward, not moving back. So in the past I have been guilty of always going back and thinking, oh, I've been so silly, oh, I wish I did this that way. And you know, but it's all a learning curve when you're younger, and you know, it's good to reflect on those things. But I think when you're in a space where you have to really own your decisions and, you know, think about the future, you can kind of reflect on the past, but you know, we all make decisions that are based on information you have at the time. So at that time, it feels like that was probably the right thing you did. So I can't say that I have any regrets that I can think of right now.
And then in terms of working internationally, how are you able to reach clients and to find people internationally? I think you mentioned reps before. How does that work exactly, that relationship?
Yeah, so we've got a few reps in the US that I've worked with very closely for many years now, and they have very similar passions and similar ethos. So I always enjoy chatting with them because, you know, they're your eyes and ears on the ground, so they know what's happening in their market. And I think if you are going into any international market, you have to be very open-minded about that and understand the market that you're working in and adapt yourself and be willing to be that person that is changeable and flexible, and you're willing to hear other people and learn from them, because I think that's the way to really slot into any other market, is understanding culturally what their needs are and how they work, because literally everybody operates differently. So we do love having our reps because, you know, they're the ones that steer you and guide you in the right direction. But I'm also a sucker for traveling, so I do like to go out and see clients and try and make new connections and just meet people. And it's those small conversations that then later spark bigger things.
Maybe I should ask you what we can expect to see from you, well, online currently, because no one's getting out of the house at the moment. But yeah, what's going on with you and your creatives? What can we see coming up? What exciting projects are you working on?
Well, at the moment, it seems like CGI is the thing. So it's really strange with animation. It always comes in waves that you can't ever predict. So, you know, you'll have one phase where everybody's talking about hand-drawn animation, and literally every brand, every ad agency, they all want something hand-drawn, and that is the references you get. At the moment, we're doing lots of really summery and very bright and poppy CGI work, which is quite refreshing. I think the whole COVID situation had made people really depressed, and we try to kind of keep our spirits up here by doing various things and incentivizing people to just express themselves and draw. And you know, we've been drawing for heroes instead of clapping for heroes, because we did have a few of our amazingly talented directors stricken down by the virus, which, you know, it's always really scary, and you do worry about them, because at the end of the day, we're all friends really when you think about how much we all work and interact together. So, you know, after just doing that to try and stay positive and bring some color into our lives, now it's actually quite nice to create work that, you know, is in a way bright and uplifting, but we're still just selling products because, you know, that's what we do. And it's like, oh, it feels like life is slowly resuming.
That's great. And where can we find you? Go on, give us your plugs for your socials and all that.
Oh, you can't miss me on socials, because there's pretty much only one Milana Karaica. So if you Google me, I am there on Facebook and Instagram. Twitter, I'm rubbish at. But yeah, or have a look at Nerd Productions London and follow us.
Thank you so much, Milana. That was brilliant. It's really wonderful to hear about your studio and to your journey. And yeah, I hope more studios will feel inspired to be as inclusive and collaborative as you in the future. Thanks very much.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, everybody, for making the time. Really, really grateful, and lovely to meet you all.